Call to order
A little aggressive.
the Chagrin Falls Board of Education meeting, the May 15th meeting of the Chagrin Falls Board of Education. Ms. Luca, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Garvey.
Here.
Mr. Rankin.
Here.
Mrs. Rose.
Here.
Mr. Kanziger.
Here.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Here.
Please join me as we stand and face the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So this is the point in our meeting where we invite public comment. If there's anyone here tonight who'd like to speak to the board, if you please indicate so. There's a brief statement that I'd like to read. Seeing none, we'll go ahead with the approval of minutes. Can I have a motion for the approval of the minutes for the April 2nd special meeting, the April 3rd regular meeting, the April 13th special meeting, and the April 17th regular meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Bro, seconded by Mr. Kanziger. Any discussion? Ms. Luca, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Rose.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes. Can I have a motion for board recommendation 5A?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
So moved by Mrs. O'Toole, seconded by Mr. Kanziger. Bill, would you like to lead us through some quick
Yeah,
overview?
so this is largely a charter for the board finance and budget committee. As mentioned this last meeting, we met a couple weeks ago for our inaugural meeting. We're going to be focusing on working with the treasurer. We have a proposed schedule that we're going to be going through the different quarters, with each quarter including, going over actual and planned expenditures and, providing feedback on the 5-year budget and the mid-year update, as well as just taking other feedback on capital planning and things like that with the capital planning group presentation. So that's the basic charter that we have, much in line with the charter that we have for the capital committee.
It's nice, it just sets forward the purpose of the committee, the membership, how often you meet, that type of thing. So it's nice to have in place. Thank you for doing that. Any other discussion? Ms. Luca, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. Rose.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
At this time, we'll share board committee updates. I'll just run through the name of each board committee, and if you have an update, please share it with the group, otherwise just say no report. The audit committee, Mrs. O'Toole.
No report.
Okay. The board policy committee, Mrs. Rose.
No report.
The business advisory committee, Mr. Rankin.
No report.
Capital planning, that's me, and there's no report tonight. The board finance and budget committee, Mr. Rankin.
Other than our charter, no report.
Great. And records retention, also there's no report. At this point, I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Hunt for superintendent's reports.
Okay, thank you, and good evening. Two reports tonight, both regarding facilities. Tonight, we're going to kind of introduce the first phase, or first piece of the work of the Facility Master Planning Committee. It's going to focus specifically on the transportation depot master plan and some of the recommendations regarding that facility going forward, and also just kind of talk you through, we made some modifications to the traffic pattern on the 712 campus. We want to keep that at the forefront of our board and our community as it's going to be changed coming into next year, so we want to review that as well. So I've got on here first the 712 traffic plan. I'm going to ask Ryan Schmidt from TDA to walk us through that, let us know if any modifications or changes that have been made, and certainly if there's questions from the board, we can answer those. Absolutely.
I have hard copies, does anybody want a hard copy? Okay. There. Well, thank you for having me here. I will try to be concise.
Could we have the camera turned to so the slides can be seen? Is that possible?
Yeah, 1 second.
Thank you.
Trying to open something with
Yeah.
everybody watching.
That's
It's
right.
the
It's
worst
gonna
thing on the
give you-
planet,
give you
isn't
a
it?
minute, right. I saw a really pretty poster over there too that Mr. Lifter has.
It's a full feature. You click on it and it goes really small.
Thank you.
Only the best.
I'm sure you're going to tell it's inspired by.
Well, and you might have just done a lot of work that I was gonna have my daughter do this summer. That's awesome.
So really what we're looking at, this page, which is included in the packet that you should have, gives kind of a broad idea of the challenges that we presently have at the site. So I'll just give a quick rundown of what it was and then some of the tweaks that we made to the plan. The concept has always been, the issue has been that this is Washington here, and the challenge has always been the fact that there's one main entrance to the facility, really creates some congestion. As students are trying to pull on, parents are trying to pull on, you got the buses all coming in through one access point. That's something we can't change. We all recognize that. But once you get on site, we were having challenges right here, in that some parents and some people are picking up and dropping off along this edge. There are challenges in this front area over here by the high school lot, in that some people are using the loop, some people are parking along this edge here. So you've got this area in here that's essentially blocking up the rest of the campus as people are trying to get onto the site. And then in the afternoon, there's very similar sorts of situations that happen across campus, with people picking up over here, people picking up in kind of these peripheral areas. So it's less controlled than you'd ultimately like. Bless you. The thing that we're focusing on is trying to break up traffic. So when you have challenges on a site like this, the biggest challenge is typically cross-pollination with the traffic patterns, in that you'll have bus traffic, you'll have student traffic, and the parent traffic. The student traffic we are addressing in the sense that as they pull onto the site, we're trying to get them out of the path as quickly as possible, safely as possible. And we're doing this by putting all the students at the front of campus, so that as they come on, they're making right-hand turns into the parking lots and they're getting out of the traffic flow. This should alleviate some of the congestion along here and allow parents, who are the second consumer of the site, to access this drive and come down this back way and have essentially a big, long queuing space that's not blocking up this entrance site by the baseball field. This will take some reinforcement. There will have to be people reminding people that you can't park here, you can't be stationed here waiting for a child, but this should give them ample space to safely sit and wait. And then what this also does is it allows cars to pull up along the curb so that students can get into the cars and not have to cross traffic to get into the cars. From this point, parents would then be able to loop around. There would be a temporary barricade. Parents would loop around and essentially leave the way they can, so they're not crossing traffic anywhere. They're just leaving through this path.
Ryan, what happens though if, so we're letting parents queue in that yellow?
In that yellow area.
So
yes.
the problem becomes parents try and turn it into 3 lanes because they're ready to pull out, but the people queued ahead of them.
You will have 3 lanes. So from here to here will be 2 lanes as you're pulling in and out. Along this edge here, there's enough room by the time we remove those parking spaces to have a curbside lane where people can sit and wait, and then 2 drive lanes.
Great.
So people will essentially wait, and then they'll be able to peel out and get into traffic.
That's great.
This is about as smooth as you can get it,
Okay.
in our opinion. Buses, this is one of the changes. Buses, we had originally coming back along this edge. One of our biggest challenges, our biggest unknowns, is the parent driver, just because they're coming at different times. They're not as regimented in their schedule as the students in the buses are. So to put the buses back with the parent drivers becomes a bit challenging. I'm a parent driver, I understand this principle. So to be able to put the bus drivers essentially to come across here, be able to loop through this lot and pull up in queue, they're doing this when everybody's still in the building, still being dismissed. So that shouldn't create any challenges with that. And as they're pulling out, you have who should be your safest drivers driving across the front of the campus in your bus drivers. So this allows them a nice, safe entry-exit. It allows them a clear-cut way out across the front of the campus, which we think is beneficial too. And it doesn't compete with a little bit more of an irregular schedule that you'll have with some of the parents. So some of the other things that we've done to help reinforce this idea, this section in here would be a 3-way stop. If you're going to have any person on campus that's helping facilitate traffic movement in the afternoons and early in the mornings, this would be the one-stop part where you could potentially benefit, and that somebody could help wave through traffic through here or wave through traffic through here. If either of those lanes is light, you'd be able to push people through. Ultimately, we are always constricted by the fact that this stoplight has its timing sequence, and that's ultimately going to be the driver of everything. But as we get rid of the parking along this edge and we have 2 out lanes, you're going to alleviate a lot of that congestion that backs up into the rest of the campus because you've got more ways for people to get off campus. One of the other things that we are proposing is that there is an entrance presently into this parking lot here. Our recommendation is to close that off permanently and create a very substantial crosswalk at this location. This would get students across to this parking lot, visitors across to this parking lot, and it would also prevent people from coming into the campus and trying to either turn into this parking lot quick or sneak out of that parking lot quick as they're leaving at the end of the day. That would force one kind of primary entrance exit, and it would put it in a spot where it's easier to get in and out of that parking lot. The other suggestion across this back is that we're going to really promote this entrance into this large student lot. One controlled access point, again, it alleviates a lot of the congestion, and it also allows this crosswalk to be less traveled. There would be fewer cars passing over it. So this is something that you could potentially put a temporary barricade, a couple cones or something like that up in the afternoon and really focus traffic down to one location. Other than that, I mean, it's just, I think the big challenge that we're all going to have is just education, and Chris and the school staff has already taken big strides in putting together a document that is more simplified but more easily understood probably to the general public that will help kind of reinforce some of these concepts and ideas.
So you end up with 2 student crosswalks on
You do-
the front side?
You end up with, this one is, yeah, this one comes straight out of the shared space and takes you to this main lot. This is the one that I would encourage students to be the primary entrance if they're utilizing this lot. This one takes you to that primary cross campus sidewalk. So this one will be reinforced, and this one is really for visitors at those times of the day, because you essentially have a sidewalk that comes along here. And this entrance right now, there is crosswalk there, but it's right next to that driveway, and it creates somewhat of an unsafe condition as right up against it.
Well, so if someone's a visitor to the middle school in the morning when
Mhm.
people are dropped off, they would just tell someone, I'm a visitor to the middle school to get over there?
They would, that's what they do at that time of day. Yeah, you'd come across, this is not blocked, so you would be able to come across, and these are the visitor spaces for that, so if you're a visitor, that's what you do. Yes.
Is that a raised crosswalk, the first one by the high school?
Ideally, day one, I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing that day one. I would wait until you're doing a real paving project to cut that up, and to be putting that in day one probably isn't the best use of dollars.
We're not doing any paving there, Mr. Wonder?
In that location, I do not think we are doing any paving. I think we are at the end of the drive.
Nice to slow them down a little bit.
They are, and the crosswalks you have, those raised ones, are, in our opinion, the best way to do that. They're very good, and they're all concrete, so they hold up really well, easy to maintain, and they're
So if
visible.
we are doing paving on campus, would you recommend we get a cost on that to see?
It would, yes, I mean, we could get a cost on it to see what it is. The thing that I would caution is that will take longer to cure up and to set than anything else that we're doing. The asphalt work that you're doing, asphalt's a quick process relatively compared to something like that. The other challenge that you have with this, and the reason I'd recommend waiting until you're actually doing pavement work, asphalt pavement work, is when you saw cut asphalt, you essentially create 2 weak seams along the 2 edges. And as you pour in that concrete, no matter how good they are, they're going to undermine that asphalt on either side of it. So you're going to create 2 weak conditions on either side, which traps water, which creates puddling, which ultimately deteriorates your asphalt faster than anything else. So I would recommend waiting. You could get a price just to see what you're in the ballpark for. This might be something where you could do an asphalt one, but those will get knocked off the first time you plow. So that's something I recommend doing long term, but it's not something I would maybe put the dollars into quite yet.
The other question I have is, we have student walkers and bikers who come from the village, and they usually come down that rec sidewalk.
That's not going to change.
And
That's
where will
still.
they cross?
They could cross anywhere along here, or they could come down and come across to here. But I think they kind of come down through here anyway, and I think that would probably be maintained.
Okay.
We're not really disrupting anything back
There's
here.
There's an existing crosswalk
Painted-
there.
the painted
that will
one,
still
the
be
sign,
painted,
okay.
And I still see that as a sign.
Yeah.
And they're only crossing the buses, which is nice. That's
Yeah.
actually a much safer crossing now.
And that
It's
was,
just the bus traffic.
and that was the whole idea is, I mean, right now, and it works, it flows very well, but everybody goes through this loop. And so you're taking all these cars potentially and dragging them through multiple parking lots and across different portions of your site. We're trying to break your site down into chunks because the more you can kind of do that and you have one primary control point, we just feel like that's the wisest solution to control that traffic.
So Ryan, we've had this conversation a little bit. If this proves to be effective and more efficient, there was a talk of a potential kind of circle in that corner.
Traffic circle.
Yeah, right here.
Freeway stop.
Mhm.
Is there enough space to pull that off?
You would have to do some grading. There's enough room, but you would have, ultimately, this is a hill right in through here, so you would have to cut this back a bit, and so you would have to do a bit more substantial site work there. One of the other things that you could do as you're doing these lots, I mean, long-term, big picture, greatest things you could possibly do if you had the money to do it, is to ultimately drag the student drivers in through this back part and have the parking essentially pull forward a bit. And we talked about that, but just the cost day one is so substantial. But if you ever do a serious parking project across the front of the campus, those kinds of things would help. And this circle here is one of those types of things where it could potentially speed up traffic. It would prevent some of the potentials for conflict that happen at any stop sign. So, the only thing worse than a stop sign is no stop sign, and that's what we presently have in some of our situations right now. So I think this condition is very obvious and it's clear to what you're doing. The traffic circle is more efficient. So.
Just to say, if it obviates having a staff person stand out there during a road dismissal, it might be worth looking into the.
Yes, I think that would help with that. I think of all the areas on site, I feel like, at least in my talks with the high school principals and people of that ilk, it feels like they have ownership of this and they like to have some sort of representation out there. And I think this plan consolidates where it would be most effective to put somebody. You're not dragging people into multiple locations across the site, so I think that'd be helpful. I mean, back here, having periodic observation would be good. I think my concept is kind of this idea that you have people that once a month spend a couple days out there that going through and just kind of remind people of how things work. That way you don't get people, myself, anybody, getting a little bit lazy on how the process is supposed to work. It's just easy to cut corners, and by having somebody doing that sort of thing, periodic reminders, I think it will just help reinforce why we're doing this too. It's all about safety and efficiency. This process, the goal was not to speed up traffic.
Yeah.
This process was about safety and about getting people into their spots in a more direct manner and creating or removing conflicts at some of these intersections and things. You'll still have pretty much the same in and out just because of this. I mean, that's always going to be our big driving factor. One last thing that we're proposing, and this is something that can be changed at any time, is just how this is utilized a little bit. This is the one last part that is a little bit of a sticking point. And one of our concepts was that we make this an entrance only, and this becomes your in-out for this parking lot space. That would reverse the parking direction on this lot, but essentially you'd be able to get into this lot and then you'd exit back here, which in theory would pull people away from this crosswalk intersection. This is something that you'd have a stop sign and you'd have to control that, but that would take out essentially 90 vehicles from this entrance point. And a lot of people, if they're coming from this direction, would avoid, ever having to interact with us, so.
I would just recommend you watch that and dismissal, because the students trying to make the left turn when the traffic is lined up at the light, I think that's one of the most dangerous turns for the kids.
It's challenging. This situation is something that's a bit challenging too, and it's just that proximity to the traffic light. There's not enough throat here for people to really queue up and to get across that traffic, unless you have somebody standing back, holding them back as they kind of pull out into that area. This was just another concept as to how to try and alleviate that a bit, so.
What's the number of parking spaces before and after by category?
Oh, boy. I don't remember that number off the top of my head. We were right in par. Right now, you presently have more because you're utilizing this parking down in here, but you're not utilizing this because this is occupied by the trailers. Net, we're going to come out somewhere real close to net zero on this thing because we're losing some of these and we're picking up a bunch of them up here. Our idea was that we'd take and we'd push as much of the parking up to this front of the campus so that this could help support the stadium, this could help support baseball, the rec, and then obviously the Performing Arts Center and the gyms. It would get more people in after-hour events, you know, kind of up at the front of campus.
We do have the back drive being an event parking
Mhm.
area, so parking along the drive, if we had a football game or a large event, you could still park along the area. We would just sign that, I think, as another.
Yeah. And this is, again, this is wide enough, and if you're not using this curbside lane as pickup drop-off, it essentially functions as 3 bays through Salt.
I'm surprised I mean, it's net zero, I mean, that's a big chunk we're picking up by the football field.
You are, it's not quite net zero. I mean, you're losing a handful through here, so you're still picking up some parking spaces. The amount of student spaces that are kind of assigned and dedicated is very similar, and so that's why I'm looking at it that way. But you do pick up a lot of staff parking across the back of the site that presently now they're kind of just intermixed, and it's not quite so concise.
We
We're
lose
also
some at the middle
losing-
school too, though, right?
What's that?
We lose some at the middle school too.
Parking?
Yeah.
No, presently you don't. You lose them from this area to about here, this section in through here. These, we're not touching this
So
at all.
when we put tennis courts in though.
If you put tennis courts
I guess
in, you would lose some
I'm
space.
confused about how that visitor parking is gonna work with the buses pulling around and queuing unless we only have it available during certain hours when the buses aren't.
This really wouldn't be any different than how it is now. Presently, everybody comes in this way now and loops around and does this now. The buses pull in here now. The visitors could come in here and enter the parking lot, park now, and then go back out the same way as they do now. There's really no difference to how they function. There is reserved parking up here for visitors. This is a visitor lot, so again, I would encourage, again, if you're visiting the Board of Ed or any of those spaces, to encourage visitors to use kind of that lot and some of these front spaces in that lot. But the middle school, this really shouldn't function any differently than it does now. The difference is that you're not pulling all of these students back through here to get to this and to get to this. They're being pulled out of the mix sooner, so it should make that motion a bit easier to get back there.
And you've got a lot of students that are currently parking in that middle school lot.
And so what about the tennis court? So let's flash forward another year from now, 2 years from now, what about the tennis courts?
I think that's a conversation for us to have at that point. Look at the cost of reinstallation versus what we're, currently, the arrangement we currently have, and make a decision on that going forward.
Right, but we kind of talked about this as a, temporary solution, see how it works, but, I mean, we're going to be faced with it though. We're either going to have to cut down to forever to the 2 courts or else, we lose that whole middle school and then we're net down a lot.
You would pick up these again. So if you change out and you put a lot in through, or if you put your tennis courts in through here, that would ultimately affect how we rework all of this. That's a pretty substantial project. But you would, in theory, pick up some space up there as well for parking. The concept, the last thing we had talked about with these tennis courts down through here, if they ultimately ended up here, was the idea of pushing them back and creating some front parking anyway. So you would still try to maintain that. We'd still try to maintain these visitor spaces and the ability to pull down through here and move back out.
So the bus route you would be able to retain?
Yeah, you just push it up. You wouldn't pull it through the back of the parking lot. It would just push up along this edge. And so you'd slide your tennis courts to the back side of that.
And then you're going to probably have all staff parked in that rear lot.
Yes.
Middle school and high school.
So the nice thing is, this is reversible.
Yeah.
A lot of what you're showing us is just directions, like directional flow, and the parking lots themselves aren't all that different. So if we can revert, we can try it, see if it works, and then see where we're at on the tennis courts and then
I
want
think,
to revert back to what we had.
right, this is something that I give it a little bit of time, because the first couple weeks are probably gonna be a little rough, because nobody's gonna be used to it. So I would give it a little bit of time. I think somebody threw out the idea of trying for a semester or two and see how it goes. I think it will take that amount of time to get people used to it and really understand it. Because you've been doing something for so long, it's just something that takes a little time to
Sure.
catch up with. But, I mean, ultimately, long-term, it should make, for example, these people's life easier. The students' life should be easier to get to their lots. Everything should be a little easier because you cut out this step, essentially having to come back across the back of the campus.
I'm just guessing that, I'm just figuring that I think we're probably picking up quite a few spaces because, we're knocking some out on the back, we're picking up a big chunk on the top.
Day one, that's true, yes.
Right. I think we're gonna like the pattern, and I think we're gonna be addicted to it. And I mean, I'm not a tennis guy, it's no skin off my back, but,
Mhm.
We just have 2 tennis courts.
yeah. Tennis court people will be pissed.
Tennis is, and I'm not a proponent or negative on the idea, it's just one of the most expensive, things to put in outside. And so it's one of those biggest challenges to kind of talk through the idea of putting in tennis courts just because of the ramifications. And I get that, and we have a lot of information, we can have a lot of resources that can give you kind of current pricing for those sorts of things, and it's ultimately a value system as to how important it is.
Yeah, but I would also, if we're gonna look at that conversation, I would open up even Gurney to a potential option for those as well, to see if that makes sense.
If we're going to build new, where's the
Right.
most ideal place?
And Gurney has a really nice athletic campus. I mean, that across that backside, and there are some pockets of that athletic campus that are probably underutilized, like that section where that playground, that kind of older playground is, that's right off that north parking lot. Those sorts of areas, you could potentially put something and it would enhance that site. So there's definitely potential there.
I like the flow of this.
I like that it's consistent morning and afternoon.
Yes.
We often forget that sometimes it's a grandparent or a stepdad or stepmom or somebody who's not used to the traffic flow and they're trying to figure it out. So I think that's really nice. It's very creative. Appreciate your work on this.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I got another one for you.
All right.
Yes.
So let's transition to the transportation
Yes.
department.
Yes. Anybody want a copy of that?
Just pull a little bit closer.
I got this.
You know what, if you have them.
I do.
I'll take them.
Yes, yes. They're good for making notes. I make notes on everything, so. So we are doing the big, broad picture master plan for middle school, high school campus, the school campus that we're on right now, and obviously the Gurney campus. You just did a very substantial, great project at the intermediate school, so we're not really contemplating that site presently. So what we found through the charrettes, through discussions with staff, through discussions with students and parents and everybody, is the idea that the transportation facility and the maintenance facilities that presently exist are starting to get to that point where they're not helping promote those two programs as effectively as they could. So I will jump right into this. This on our list, as we're assembling our list, is a top priority for steps you should take. And it's for the obvious benefits that you'll see in a minute. So really what we're looking at, this is your existing conditions at the Gurney campus. This is the Gurney School. This takes you out to Bell. This is the drive that gets you up to the facility, the back drive. This is the big athletic complex. There is a storage unit, shipping container at this location. This is that playground area I was just talking about. This is the transportation building. Your buses queue here. You have staff parking that kind of sits along this edge. This is widely open. There isn't a lot back in that area. There's a little bit of storage along this edge. And this is your fueling station. This asphalt that's in through here for the parking is bad. It's really bad. It's full depth replacement bad. So whatever you do, this should be replaced at some point because it's going to start to degrade your buses, it's going to degrade vehicles, and just create an unsafe condition that you don't want to deal with. So this should be replaced at some point. This is not something that can be patched. You'll see people out patching asphalt. This isn't something you can do that with. It won't last. This is to the point where there's failure in the base materials of the asphalt, and so it should be replaced. The fencing around the campus is as old as this facility is, so that's rusting through, it's got problems, it's got holes. You've got the block heaters and stuff that support the buses, those are operational, they're just old. Everything in here is old. This building, which I'll have some pictures in a minute, is old as well. It's small. Presently, you have approximately 30 buses that are in here. Your break room, your meeting room, you have a room where the drivers go to get education and stuff. It's probably this big. So it's a teeny tiny little room for all those people to try to gather and support what they're trying to do. The actual bays themselves, there's one pull-through bay and there's one single pull-in bay. Pull-through bay means there's doors on both sides, so you can get in, you can get out. Those are the most desirable because you hate to have to try and back a bus out of those locations. The pull-in bay, if you pull in there and you stop, you're basically stuck there until you can get your work done. But the way he functions out there a lot of the time is he needs that area for work just because the rest of the space is so small. So he'll have, wheels pulled apart, there's equipment sitting there, and you'll see all that in these pictures, that's the area that he has to work with when he's working on the vehicles in that location. The storage also is a bit insufficient. There is a small mezzanine above the offices, and that is functional, it's just small. Again, the whole building right here I think is around 2,400 square feet, so it's not a very big building. So we recommend replacement of that building ultimately is what I'm getting to. The outside of the building, it's masonry, it's getting cracking, there's a failure of some of the lintels, the plumbing is old and inadequate, the heating systems are old. Just by and large, to update all of those pieces gets to a point where it's cost prohibitive to just keep dumping money in.
That aligns with the work that we've seen on the
Yes.
facilities condition index, that this is an area that is it's much more economically feasible to replace than renovate.
Right, and when you think about what this facility does for the district, it's very critical. It supports all of your vehicles, it supports your buses, which gets your students safely to their schools. This is a critical building, and it's something that is easily forgotten because it's on a hill back in the trees, but it is something that really helps promote everything else that you try to do. The last thing is this storage container. Again, this is supporting some of the storage that's over at the intermediate school. Our goal would be, as we do a bigger building back and through here, where we'd be able to help support those storage needs. And then obviously the new buildings, across campus and things on other campuses would help support that as well. So you could free up this space in through here. So these are just some of the visuals inside. This is what I was talking about. This is one of the pull-in bays. This is about 3 or 4 feet. There's all kinds of equipment and stuff stacked there. This is a tool crib, crammed. It's very tight, very effectively laid out. They've got their stuff in there. They do a great job, but they're working with what they got in that regard. This is the end of this bay, so you can see they have a lot of equipment pulled in front of the vehicle because they're trying to do multiple things in front of that area. This is an area on the other side where the FAR bus is, the pull-through bus. This ultimately is right up against the bus, so all this equipment is right up against the bus. In an ideal situation, you'd have another 6 feet, so they could be working there, somebody could be pulling buses through, and so you'd have the ability to effectively use this rather than having a bus there and really limiting what you're able to do with this equipment. This is that lounge I was talking about, so 30 people in here is pretty challenging. And then this is just the asphalt. This is called alligatoring. I'm sure people have seen it everywhere, but that is really a symptom of a failure in the base. And so that's something where you got to take out all the asphalt, you got to fix the sub base and get it to a point where you can put in new asphalt that's going to stay. This is the high school campus. At the high school campus, this is your maintenance facility. There is no transportation on this site, and there is no maintenance facility on the other side. So the maintenance facility is located in an old outbuilding which was a music room. It's got tiered steps inside of it. At some point they've gone through and they've essentially made it 2 levels so that the bottom level is used for maintenance work, the top level is used for vehicles, it's used for office space, it's used for everything, but it's all open to each other. So if he's working down below and one of the gentlemen is up at the top trying to make a phone call or to do business, they're having to work over the top of each other. If you have a mower in there trying to warm it up, It's going while somebody's trying to do work down in the bottom area, so it's just a whole lot of cross interaction that shouldn't really be happening in that environment. It doesn't have a restroom, it doesn't have some of those other amenities that would really make more effective use of this. Imagine having to go to one of the other buildings every time you need to do something. So it's got a lot of challenges. The other big challenge is, since it is located over here, everybody's familiar with the fact that there's a massive hill on this edge, so they're pulling up 6-8 feet just to get in the building with their vehicles. You've got maintenance vehicles that are perched on this hill. That's a safety issue, that's also an aesthetic issue. I mean, if we have these vehicles that are there, it just kind of is something that is very difficult to make look nice at a very prominent drive through your campus. The other thing that you have, this building again is something that hasn't had a lot done to it over the years. It's something that's been maintained and is operational, it's functioning, but just owing to all the challenges we mentioned and the cost it would take to kind of bring it up to a standard that would make everybody more effective, really should be replaced. The building could be maintained for something, storage or something of that nature, but to be using that as an inhabited space for these types of work items is really challenging. The other thing that we have on campus that helps support this is this area back behind the grandstand. Presently, they park vehicles back there. Those are some of the maintenance vehicles. That's also some of the site storage. So if you have grooms keeping and stuff like that, that all presently goes in this back location. They store cones and stuff of that nature. This area is kind of prime real estate when you think about some of the limitations we have up at the front of campus as far as space, access, things like that. To be able to clean this up, get the vehicles out of here, would first, again, an aesthetic thing. You have this essentially maintenance yard that's visible from Washington a lot of the year because we lose all our leaves. It's also something that these vehicles are right up front, they're visible. If somebody was so inclined, they'd have easy access to them and be able to get to them and vandalize or something of that nature. So moving them out of this location is beneficial for those reasons. It would also free up this space so that if you had a visiting team arriving, you could drop off students at that location. It would give you a space that if you have a booster party or something where you're trying to sell wares, team gear, stuff like that, they don't have to be in the middle of this parking lot space. You could create a space back there. There'd be a lot of really good uses for that lot that wouldn't involve storage vehicles and things like that. That being said, if they're getting deliveries for, turf infill or something like that, it'd still be able to support that function. If that wouldn't go away, it just wouldn't be a permanent home for those sorts of things. So ultimately...
So Ryan, nothing will be stored in either of those?
No, this building I think would be maintained and be used as a storage space. I think it's too good of...
But not a
the bones are
maintenance
gonna,
facility.
but I wouldn't take the time and I wouldn't spend the money to really renovate the inside for anything other than bulk long-term storage.
Okay.
You could still store your lawn care vehicles there. It doesn't necessarily make sense to totally abandon that concept. Because again, if you're storing a couple vehicles here for mowing and you're not having to transport them, that does ultimately save a lot of time driving back and forth.
And what remains in building number 2?
This area, this is that lot, and that's what I'm saying. I would
It's just a
mostly,
lot,
it's a
right.
lot. I
Got
would
it.
mostly keep that lot open, but again, if you have deliveries, hurdles, new hurdles, or
Okay.
something like that, you'd have a space to do those
Understand.
sorts of things.
So it's just a matter of cleaning both of those out, right? They're going to be
Yes.
cleaned out and their functions are going to move to Gurney campus
Yes,
primarily.
the function of the building on the hill, the current maintenance facility, I would recommend kind of a simplified version of what it does now. It would still support your on-site kind of mowing and things like that. It would also support storage, which is at a premium, because some of the actual maintenance capacity, all of that would move, the bulk of it would move to Gurney. You'd still maintain something small here. You would still have a workbench that they got one little thing they got to do. They could come over and they could use a bench and they have a drill and they'd be able to do some work in that space. It wouldn't be totally abandoned. But if you're taking apart swing sets and redoing all the harnesses and you're painting that stuff out, and you're doing those sorts of things that are more involved and more complicated, you're doing all that over at the other facility.
So is it accurate to say that all the vehicles are basically getting moved?
Yes. You'd have one protected lot with fueling next to the maintenance building, next to where all your drivers go. You'd have one hub for all of those sorts of things. So this is This you can see, this is your drive to get into this building. This is the high access bay. The low one is over here. There's a man door in over here. This is the upper platform they built with some of your mowers. This is where his office is. So it's basically just an open office. On the other side of this pile of stuff is where they're doing the work, and that's down a couple of steps. So this is one of their work areas. Again, they've already got a bunch of storage in there. This is the primary workspace. This is this wall, so you can just imagine it's tiered like this, and this is where they're working down below. Very congested, very tight, not helping to facilitate what they're trying to do in there. And this is that lot I was talking about. So all of this kind of stuff, I would suggest be eliminated so that this space, again, could be cleaned up, could be utilized for some of those other functions for the campus. What we're proposing is essentially keeping the same footprint at the Gurney campus. We would keep the buses where they presently are. All the asphalt would be redone. All the fencing would be redone. The block heaters would be redone. You'd update your lighting across the campus. We'd maintain and monitor your current fueling station. The position of it is good. It's right at the top of the hill. It's something that you would replace items as they were deemed necessary, as they start to get to a point where it makes sense to physically do that. I wouldn't do a wholesale fueling station replacement unless it's absolutely necessary. We're proposing a building be built back here. This would be a combined maintenance and transportation building. The idea is that the present building sits here. You'd be able to construct this one at the back of the campus while the existing one remains where it is. It might limit the fact that you might only be able to pull into that from the front side while you're doing this work, but they would not be shut down while you're doing this work at the back of the campus. That would allow us to construct this building, get it done, tear this one down, do your lot work, and then essentially clean up the site. As I mentioned before, having a campus with combined resources would provide a big parking space out front for all of your staff that work there, and provide a big space for all your buses. It would create a lot of space of shared use. So the meeting space inside, the restrooms, office space, copiers, storage space, all that stuff would be able to be jointly used. This is a concept that we put together. This is not a design. This is not a plan we're promoting. This is a concept to show how it could work. It is really a programming exercise to say, if you had your current transportation facility, you made it wider. So we're adding 2 pull-through bays. We're increasing the space between the bays. We're increasing the amount of space at the end where you'd be doing work up against the wall. We're creating a breakdown space in this area so that they could take stuff out, work on parts, work on pieces, have access to a much larger tool crib in through here, have an office off of the space that also has visibility back to the yard, have access to a mezzanine space where they could store all their goods, and then have a shared space in the middle where they could get to a large meeting room, lounge space for not only, kind of developmental type stuff, talking through procedures and stuff of that nature, but also just a space to get in and get ready to go out in the mornings. Shared restrooms, and then other, storage and stuff of that nature. The other thing we're proposing on this side is to pull the maintenance over to this site. We would still maintain, obviously, some of the stuff on this campus, but this would become your primary hub. This would allow you to have a lot of workspace around the outside. It would allow them to have an office to actually go and do those sorts of things, restrooms, meeting space, and then ultimately access to, again, a lot of mezzanine storage of some sort in this building. We ran some general pricing through here. These are based off of some numbers that we've gotten somewhat recently. There's fluctuation in the market right now, as everybody knows, so we gave a range. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle of that, but I think it's always best to plan for the worst and hope for the best, and as a rule of thumb, that's what we would typically do from a costing exercise. So you're looking at somewhere between $200 to $250 a square foot for the building, and that's looking at not only the structure, but some of the equipment that gets built into the space as well. And then the site improvements, we typically budget around $375,000 an acre. You're looking at about 1.2 acres. So your total will be in that neighborhood from 1.6 to around $2 million for the construction aspect of things. This does not take into account, CMR fees, architectural fees, stuff of that nature. But all of that in total would probably add another $300,000 to $400,000 onto this number at the end of the day. And that includes some of your contingencies, allowances, stuff like that. That being said, this is a big number. This is something that we're looking at presently, 6,000 square foot building roughly with some mezzanine space on top of that. The concept would be to try to make this as cost effective as possible. If we were to do this project for you, the first step would be to ultimately meet with everybody and make sure there's no kind of extra built into this that is unnecessary. We would try to get that program down to as effective as possible. To give a comparison, this building's 6,000 plus square feet. Presently I have 2,400 and around 2,300, 2,400 between your two buildings now, so about 5. So you're picking up over 1,000 square foot in this new facility, and you're still maintaining some of that existing space. So your net gain in space is pretty substantial. So there might be areas in this building to help kind of pull that in a little bit. And then the structure itself. There are a million different ways to do this. You could go with a conventional style building where you're building masonry walls and you're putting on a steel roof, something like that. Or we could look at a pre-engineered metal building type solution with a nice outside veneer on it, maybe some low masonry walls, and you get a nice siding on it, and you treat it that way. That's a very cost-effective solution. To give you a frame of reference on that, we just got bidding for a project of about 28,000 square feet for a pre-engineered metal building. That was coming in right around $2 million. So it doesn't have quite the amenities that you'd have in some of these spaces, but it was a giant building compared to what we're talking about here. So, any questions? I talked a lot.
Just want to be clear, the parking or the paving is in that number?
That's in that number as well. That's included in this site improvements costing. So if you extrapolate that, that includes your lights and all that kind of stuff as well. So.
Are we at a place where we can look at our permanent improvement budget for the next 5 years and give Ryan a budget to work within with this, and then come back to the board and say, here's what was brainstormed that they give up on at this number? Or I would love to make sure that we communicate the expectation that because we're building new doesn't mean this is the time to get all the bells and whistles with
Right.
this too. It needs to be a moderate build.
And what I would suggest is a ballpark. And that might be something that is just kind of a number that we all target. And then we ultimately have those meetings to talk through programming. We talk through, the benefits of keeping some of the amenities here and how we can make all that stuff come together. And then we work towards that. So this might be not even close to what we end up with by the time we do all those exercises. I think the biggest thing is to get the ball rolling on some of those preliminary design aspects, if this is something that you're entertaining doing soon. If it's not, then you can wait, obviously, but...
Can you walk through like the fine tuning?
Yes, so the process being, a project like this, we typically take a month and a half to do all of our upfront programming, due diligence, discussions. We've done a lot of that with the people that occupy these buildings presently, but that was very kind of big picture, kind of those kind of lofty discussions. This would be about getting into the nuts and bolts of, I have a workbench, it doesn't work, this is why, and how do we make it a functional space? That's how you get into those details and drive your program. So that takes about a month and a half, and then you have several iterations of the design. We'll come with a design, you have CMR on board, they'd be putting pricing towards that design, and you'd be working through that to make sure you're kind of aligning with where that wants to be. If you don't have a CMR on board, we would be able to hire an independent estimator to do that same sort of thing, so we can keep tracking the pricing as we're going along. And then we'd ultimately refine what that budget and design is. But that's something that probably that design development stage would take a month and a half, 2 months to get through that. And then there's the construction document phase, which would be doing the final, this is how we're going to build it, these are all the systems and how they all tie together, and this is the finished package ready for bidding. And that's another, month and a half, 2 months. So all in total, you're probably talking 6-7 months worth of time to do all that work. That's what I'm saying. If you're talking about starting work next spring, that's something that you want to start the process fairly soon so that you can get that ball rolling. If this is something that's projecting out another year, then you wouldn't have to, move quite as quickly. But this is something that, again, that asphalt isn't going to get better, the building conditions aren't going to get better, the pricing probably isn't going to get much better. So if it's something that everybody's strongly considering, it is something that I would suggest doing with us or with whoever. It is one of our top recommendations for projects too. The asphalt too, I just want to go back to that real quick. I would not recommend doing the asphalt now and then say we'll do the building in 5 years. You'll have wasted that asphalt. So it would do it both together, or say we're keeping that building forever and we can replace the asphalt. I would never stagger it asphalt first. So. Other questions?
We've seen a lot of support that this is a very strong need and that the time is upon us.
Yes. And that's something that we're happy to help, start with those initial phases. If, again, you would like to work with us, that'd be fantastic. We'd appreciate it. And we would be able to get some of those kind of concept things going, but that is something that we'd have to get some sort of an agreement put together and do that sort of thing.
What, a contract?
I know.
So,
I'm usually the last person to bring it up, so.
so what would that look like? I mean, would it be a phase, where the board would kind of monitor that as we go? I know there's different ways of delivering.
Completely depends on
projects.
how you feel most comfortable. I mean, like this type of project, we would generally have that initial discussions with the group. If it's something that you want to have some preliminary input and say, these are the things that are important to us, we can do that. And then we meet with all the staff and kind of develop that program. And then ultimately we come back and we present in this format. We can present at facilities meetings, those sorts of things, and talk through issues. Those are all very, very functional, very, all of those delivery methods are very good at promoting this type of process. I would hate to just kind of design it in a vacuum with the maintenance and transportation facility departments, just because it is something that I think needs a broader kind of approach. And working with the district, we've never really had that kind of philosophy. So I think this type of format is very good. But that's something that, I'm sorry to butt in, but that's something that you would have that kind of first kickoff meeting, and then you'd have a month or so of that process of developing the concept, coming back with a few plans and some kind of broad ideas of budget, and then be able to talk through it. It's like a weekly sort of.
Would that be like a design development phase
Yeah.
before buying the entire design?
Yeah, I mean, it could be said that the very traditional way of doing this is schematic design, design development, and then construction documents. Schematic design being that first grouping of information that I talked about. Design development, getting a little bit more information, you're putting hard numbers to it, you're trying to get a better idea of your concept price. That's ultimately the point at the end of DD that you're saying we're right on track, or we got to make some modifications, or we got more money than we thought we did, and we can make some, but you can add to the project. That's the time you do that, and then the construction documents are, we're comfortable with this, we're ready to move into construction documents, and you do that sort of process. So, and like I said, it's kind of broken down probably into 2-month chunks, ish.
So I think we could probably give some guidance tonight on timing, on the scope. But I also think we need to see how, $2 million is going to impact our ability to do projects over the next couple of years. And we haven't really integrated that to see where the money would come from and what would not get done as a result. So I would propose that we have a little bit of a discussion tonight about timing and scope. And then we could call capital planning together if you want before September and take a look at what the prioritized projects in the district would be, how this affects our PI budget, et cetera. It seems like it would be an answer you would want before September.
But I think if the expectation is to try to get it going or the possibility of getting it going next spring and completed next summer, we'd have to bring that together.
Yeah.
Sooner.
And we may be comfortable saying, go do this,
Yeah.
and then capital planning is going to mean, and we're going to get a better idea of, you probably would anticipate, we may want a plan A and a plan B.
Yes.
Plan A has all the bells and whistles, and plan B is, okay, kind of the bare minimum.
And we could look at this a couple of different ways. first of all, one of the things you're gonna do, again, if you do this project with whoever, us or whoever, you're gonna want your survey, you're going to want your geotechnical borings, you're gonna want that stuff done regardless.
Would
That
you-
can be done now.
It'll be good for
It'll be
2 to
good
3
until
years, as long
it'll
as
be
we
good,
need it.
yes, yes.
Yeah,
So that's
so some of
something that
those
I would
things.
recommend, we could help get pricing for those sorts of
Mhm.
things. We don't charge to do that. We'll get pricing from a couple of entities. We can present that to you and you can choose to do that or not. But ultimately, that's something that would be beneficial for the process. The other thing that you
But
could
can
do,
you do that for the whole property?
you could do it for the whole property. You wouldn't do geotechnical for the whole property, but a survey you could get for the whole property. We recently got pricing for Menor High School's entire campus, and that came in around 18,000, which is a really great number for that large of a campus. This campus is smaller, so you could probably do better than that, but that's something that pays dividends long-term, and that you've got that kind of working diary. But what I was saying, a contract with your architect would be something that you have an upfront kind of design phase, and then you break into the more DD and CD side. So you're working through the concept, and you're like, hold the horses, we gotta rethink this. That would be your cutoff point at the end of that schematic design, is to say, yeah, this looks great, we're gonna keep moving forward with this, or we gotta think about this a little bit more and how it deeply impacts some of these other stuff. The reason I suggest possibly doing that schematic design phase quicker is it allows you to utilize your summer and not waste your summer when you could have these conversations and you could do some of the sort of thing. Like, for example, we do a lot of projects with schools, and all the staff leave in the summer, and ultimately there's a big block of time in the summer where you don't get to talk to people, and it becomes very problematic for a project. I'd hate for that to be something that becomes an issue. But splitting that contract would be something that you have a very small amount at the front of the contract, where you could get some of that preliminary design. It's schematic design, it's not preliminary.
You're already up on that though, because it's May 15th and school's out June, or May 31st, right?
Yes.
So it'd be hard to have
It's true.
a lot, you're probably looking at when they come back in August, meeting
Well,
with
I mean-
them.
Right, but your maintenance
Most of
people
those
are
people
still
are-
working.
Right. You wouldn't have everybody.
You're not gonna have the
Piece of
drivers,
it.
but
Yeah.
you're gonna have.
Well, when I was talking about kind of scope and timing, what I mean is the building and the pavement seems like it makes sense that this is a project we want to try to do all at one time. We might be able to give some guidance on that tonight. And then the timing, I think what we're hearing is advice that we are prepared to undergo construction next summer, and that we would want to get everything in place so that this project could happen. Or you said it could happen while we're in the school year, but probably is going to be easier to
It would be much
do
less
it
ideal.
spring, summer, so.
Yeah.
Can we have a discussion about those two things?
Yeah, I think there's a third part to the discussion, which Ryan's been very generously managing, which is the work that he and his company have done has been gratis. And so the question of, I think it's important to take a step back and remember that we talked to multiple design firms
Right.
at the start of this process. So
Right.
we've already done due diligence with, and have chosen to work with then design up to this point. So I think that's another conversation the board could have tonight too, of if we're moving forward in the short term, are we moving forward with them?
We also have to follow laws and rules and go out for bid and things like that for certain types of
But I
projects.
understand that.
I will mention that we went through the requests for qualifications for the master planning. There was a phase process for that, and the third part allowed us to go on to construction with that. And I did mention that David Ryder or on, so that is an option and certainly something to just be aware of.
So we've already done that.
Yes, we could have quote.
Okay, so let's break it out. The idea of doing the building and the lot at the same time. Okay. Building and lot at the same time. Next summer, I think that's, for me, is a little contingent on how the money plays out, but I think that right now I'd be okay with saying, let us know what needs to happen in the next 3 months. And, I think it's probably a reasonable amount of money to invest to get started. But we probably want to see those dollars. But generally, conceptually, I think we're starting to get up against the maintenance costs starting to exceed the costs to, rebuild the building. And so I don't think we can defer maintenance on the building or that lot for much longer.
I mean, I would really like to know the total dollar amounts on the high school and Gurney entrance projects. You know, because, I mean, that's our other big chunk of money right now,
So we need to see all of these things
Yes,
coming together.
yeah.
We have pretty good estimates on the
You'll-
Gurney.
you'll-
Yeah, but, I mean, I don't have them in my head right now.
So we're gonna change order
You know.
tonight.
Okay,
Five, six.
so I just don't know, yeah, how much money is available in permanent improvements or
Right,
whatever.
right. We need to look at that. But Candy could probably tell us, can you remind us the change order amount for the Gurney entrance and the high school entrance?
347, 353.
So, and that is coming out of the bond proceeds for the intermediate school project, plus the interest. The hope is that we have sufficient funds to manage those projects with the bond proceeds. So it won't affect the PI, hopefully, as long as everything stays on track with the intermediate school.
And there may be, if we're being optimistic, there may be more
Yeah.
that could be deferred towards this project.
So we'll know a lot more in a few months about the intermediate school project. Why don't we get a feeling from you, we can share with Chris and Bob, you know, what needs to happen immediately, and then we'll figure out when it makes sense to bring capital planning together, when we can look at this more holistically on the impact of the PI budget, as well as where the intermediate school project is at that time. And then I think we'll have the information the board probably would need
Yeah,
to
and
give a
there's other
firm decision.
decisions we will want to talk about as well in terms of management of the project, how we do that. There's various methods to deliver the construction of the project, and we'll have those conversations as well.
I knew where you're going. Okay, with regard to TDA, do we want to have that discussion now? It's not something that we maybe were intending to talk about tonight, but I mean, I can say as one of the board reps to the facilities committee that, you know, we did vet several firms and been very impressed with the work that TDA has brought forward. This is a nice project in size. It doesn't feel, you know, so overwhelming that we want to go out and repeat that whole process of getting, interviewing architectural firms. So I would be supportive.
As long as, yeah, if we did the request for proposals and we've done all that, I can move ahead, I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure that was the case.
I also support the work that's been done exceeds what we're seeing here tonight. And we've already had integrated conversations around all of the facilities things we're talking with regards to long-term maintenance, short-term maintenance, renovations that are also improvements. And so it feels like this is a great starting point in terms of moving forward with something a little more concrete.
I'm not sure. I'm fine moving forward too.
Same here, I just wanted to see the effect of the PI budget. That's what I'm concerned about. It's a big number, it's bigger than I was expecting.
So next steps will be a conversation with Ryan and how that breaks out, and we'll also talk a little bit about delivery, and we'll keep the board updated.
Yeah.
Obviously, anything would have to be approved and brought to you, and we'll kind of look at this kind of phased approach to moving forward. I would suggest we maybe then, in those conversations, target what a good date for capital planning would be to make sure financially we're okay with it,
Right,
and then move on from there.
okay. And just to
That's the question I was
underscore,
asking, because I mean, from what we've seen from the capital planning numbers and all the work that's been done, is it reasonable just to give a not to exceed the 1.65 at this point? I mean, to Phil's point, that we don't want to get to a point where this creeps up so much so that then we're saying, well, now we have to pull back on the whole project. I'd rather understand what we sacrifice and put a ceiling on it.
well, that's what I was just heading towards. So I think just to underscore and give some clear parameters, and I don't want to speak for the whole board, but I'll speak for myself. I would like to see a bare bones option that gets us what we need with no bells and whistles, you know, best cost value, and then kind of what we think we need based on the discussions with programs. And there would be two things coming forward, which would then allow us to set a not to exceed amount,
Okay.
you know, for the budget. It might be a hybrid of those two. We may say, you know what, at this point, we can only spend $1 million on this project, so what can we get for that?
And that's part of, I mean, I started mentioning the BE aspect, it also works in the idea of alternates as well.
Sure.
Like that project that I was talking about,
Exactly.
28,000 square foot one, that one we priced out one type of wall system and another type of wall system, and there was a big delta, and we were able to make those discussions, have those discussions about what's, is it worth it?
Right.
Those sorts of things.
Right.
We don't have to-
Always.
Always.
Yes.
Always.
We love those
Yes,
discussions.
those are good.
Right, Carrie?
Yes.
We love those BE discussions.
We do.
Chris, do you happen to know like how much is in the PI budget for this?
For
Because
the
it's a master
maintenance
planning
project,
project.
I don't off the top of my head, but I certainly can run the numbers and tell you, and again, I probably wouldn't have put a lot in there for the next couple of years, knowing two things. One, you don't want to put too, you want to hedge your bets and not put too much into a building that, is your building on its own, and try and keep it warm, safe, and dry. The roof is actually in pretty good shape right now. We had the roof scan done recently. Ironically enough, that's in decent shape, even though it's not cold. But it's Jim and I were looking even at the FCI and what VFA calls for. Like even next year, I believe there's the year after, there's a $200,000 spend on there. Pavement, like you said, it's got to be a heck of a lot of money, not to mention the disruption. So there's a decent amount there. And we can run a report for VFA, and then we can run a report which we actually, kind of then plan for the next 5 years. That's transportation facility related. And then the other question it sounds like you're asking is, if we did this, then what other projects would drop off the first thing within that same threshold or the board set aside for a PI? And so that's probably what you really want. That's one thing you really want to see.
You didn't say the words, but I think you're talking cost avoidance. If the project were to be done, what is the amount that would be avoided over the next 5 years that we would have had to invest in the facility? It'd be good to see. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, just got to figure out, can it fit?
I think we only had $1 million scheduled, yes, next year for all of our capital projects, so gotta steal from Peter to pay Paul or something, we're gonna figure it out, but, all right. Anything else?
Thank you, Ron. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Gary's been waiting patiently. So, why don't we give a brief update on progress on the site and then talk through the 4 change orders that are going to be recommended tonight.
Am I okay here or no?
Yep.
Yes, sir. Do you have slides? If you don't have slides, why don't you come up to the table and then you probably could just, there you go. Hi.
Everybody. In terms of progress, so on the exterior of the site, we are installing the last of our frost slabs. And if you're not familiar, the frost slabs are the concrete that goes on outside of the doors. We're doing sidewalks, curbs, and the cornice on the 1914 building, working on the gym gutter on the exterior. And doing some regrading in some areas. That's about the extent right now on the exterior. As you move on the inside, student dining, we're just waiting on some grid and ceiling tile. That's pretty much the balance that remains in the cafeteria. In the kitchen, we're installing the quarry tile on the floor at this time. So kitchen equipment has been fabricated, countertops are fabricated, and that will be delivered after the quarry tile. The quarry tile takes about 3 weeks, and it started at the beginning of this week. So about first week in June to the end of May. Moving over into the new addition, on the 3rd and 2nd floor, they're about at the same pace right now. We are going to be installing the ceiling clouds that go in the extended learning areas. And then all that remains there are the mark boards, the tack boards, some fabric wall panels that go on the Learning Commons walls, as well as the shades. That's about it. So just some minor finish work that's on the 3rd and 2nd floor. On the 1st floor, we're just beginning to drop ceiling tiles in the Learning Commons, and then everything also will follow suit. Marker boards, tack boards, shades. We're finishing up the lockers and the casework. Actually, the casework is all completed in that area. We're just finishing up the lockers. Over at the connector area, we're referencing, if you've been to the building, we're talking about the connector area where 1914 connects to the new addition, where stair B is at. So that is all framed, it is all drywalled, and everything in the connector will be taped out and ready for paint at the end of next week. And that's a small section, what I call the connector area. Same with our buck hoist room. So if you remember, on the north side of the site, we used the buck hoist to get all the materials into the building. That was demoed a couple weeks ago. We are just finishing the brick on that exterior. And that'll be done by the end of this week. Windows are going in tomorrow. And then those rooms as well will be finished, taped out, and ready for paint by the end of next week. So then those two areas will just follow suit of what I just said in the new addition part of the building. Over in the 1914 building, the second floor is the most progressed. So we are done with grid, paint is done, flooring is installed. They're working on the corridor flooring right now as we speak. On the third floor, we are just getting started painting this week. Flooring is down already up there as well, in the classrooms, with the exception of the rubber tile. The drywall on the first floor of the basement, the first floor of the 1914 building, that will be taped out as of next week. So the majority of the drywall is all installed on the first floor, but the pit is the best way I can describe it, the basement, that will be finished at the end of next week. The gym, the wood flooring refinishing is starting on Monday. The stencils for the lettering on the walls is beginning tomorrow. So that should be done by the end of this week, and they'll roll it into the floors. Once the floors are done, that's pretty much going to be finished, except for the safety wall pads have to get installed and the benches. But the windows are in, the trim is in, the cages are all installed. We've finished the cages. All that work is complete. In the auditorium, I am so happy to say this, but the scaffolding is coming down tomorrow. I am thrilled to say that. So that's coming down tomorrow, so that means all of our high work is complete. So all of our mechanicals overhead are complete, all of our lighting is complete. We did the orange peel finish on the ceiling that was finished as of today. So that scaffold will come down, and then we're just going to start moving down on those walls. So what you're going to see is the balance of the walls get skim coated where there is drywall. And then, I'm sorry, the drywall will be taped and sanded and finished, and then skim coated where it did not get laminated drywall. The stage rigging, it started this week, and it should be complete by mid next week. All the ductwork is done on the stage. So we're looking to replace the stage flooring at the end of this month. So we'll demo that out once we're done with all of our work above ceiling. And then the balance of the work in the auditorium, we have the seats arriving on site on June 3rd. We're going to store those in the cafeteria until we're ready for them to be installed, which is June 17th. So that's when those seats are going in. So that's a progress update. Any questions on it?
Looks tremendous. Was
Getting
just over
excited.
there yesterday?
I'm getting excited and sad and all at the same time. 2 more months in me, that's it. 2.5 more. Okay, so we have 4 change orders tonight. 3 are associated with the intermediate school, and then the last one that I'll be talking about is the storefront project. Okay? So change order 29, this change order is in the amount of $44,483. It consists of 4 items. The first item was, if you remember, at the front steps of the 1914 building, we did replace those steps. That was done, actually, the contractor's insurance company is paying for those. But when we went to go rebuild those, it was a request of the district to have the area waterproofed. So that does not get covered by insurance, and that was paid for by the district. So that's the waterproofing to do the front of those steps, which at the end of the day was probably the best situation, because you did have a lot of water coming in at that location. So it's to waterproof that area. The second item was the structural engineer asked us to add some angles at the top of stair A for a masonry wall detail. So it's the T&M to install those angles. Item number 3 was some plumbing rerouting that needed to be done. Essentially, the invert of the plumbing that was shown in the plumbing plans was different than the civil. So we got directed to add a sump pump and change around some of that piping in the 1914 basement. That's item number 3. And then item number 4 was a small item. It was a T&M. There was some drywall, or some beams that needed to be framed in the drywall. The drywall request there. Any questions on change order 29? Okay. Change order 30 is comprised of 5 items. That amount is $42,118. I'm sorry, did I?
That's 34.
Thank you, I just said it. Thank you, Candy. So 30 is in the amount of $28,790, thank you. And there's 5 items associated with this. So the first item, there was a request for information asked, and there was not a detail in the drawings shown to demo a ramp. It's the ramp that goes in the connector to the auditorium lobby to the gym corridor. So we had to demo that out in order to install the ramp. So that was the T&M for that. Second item was a bulletin that was issued. It's Bulletin 14. There were a request to repaint some walls different colors. So the cost for that is to repaint those walls. The next item in that was, after some talking with Mike Doherty, he requested that an encoder be added to the touchscreen monitors. It's just a functionality issue for you in order to operate properly. So that was a small add that was requested. And then there's some safety wall pads that were asked to be added in the gym. Item number 2. Item number 3 was, if you remember back in Bulletin 3, we've talked about this a couple different times, but the state changed the locations of your standpipes during their review, and so we had to cut in to the masonry to put the fire hose cabinets in. So the fire hose cabinets and all that work was done on a separate change order, but I wanted to do that, because I got a lump sum from the masonry cut-in and I thought it was too high, so I wanted to do a T&M, and it came in much less. And so this is for that T&M to cut in those hose boxes. The fourth item is to add a door. It's a door 231. It's for access to the roof. This was one of the things that Lenny, our superintendent, was talking to both Bob and Chris from a functionality standpoint. When he was walking through the building, he kept on looking at it thinking, they're really going to want access up here. I think it would be a good idea to put a door here. So we talked about it with the team, and we added a door and changed out some roof access ladders, just kind of some afterthoughts of how you're really going to use the space. So that was item number 4 in this change. And the last item is item number 5. This was an unforeseen condition. I've talked to a couple of you about it over at Stairby. Once that area was demoed, there was an existing steel beam that needed to be raised. It was essentially a head knocker if you were going down those steps, so somebody tall would have hit their head. It wasn't known to be there, and we had to raise it up a little bit in order to get proper clearance. That's change order 30. Any questions on that one? Change order 31 is in the amount of $42,118. These were for several electrical and technology changes that were made in Bulletin 10, along with technology changes that were made in Bulletin 7. And some of those changes just came out of discussions when we were talking about our screen monitors and how Mike Doherty uses the spaces, and they were programming changes that needed to be made. Item number 3 was raising the cafeteria ceiling. We were out there with the architect, and when we were looking at your stone and the arches, we both agreed that it would probably be a better idea to raise that ceiling for an aesthetic purpose, higher than what was initially shown in the drawings, and everybody agreed it was probably the better route to go. So we ended up doing that, raising that. We did that on T&M. And the last item was there were expansion control joints that were not shown for were added as the cost to add those expansion control joints. Any questions on that one? A lot of information, sorry.
But you give it to us in advance, so we've had an opportunity to read, and you're so thorough.
And there's a lot of
It's really
backup
nice of you to
after
come
that,
and answer our questions, but that's probably why you're...
The last one is for the Gurney and the high school entrances and storefronts project. So one thing I just did want to clarify was when we're talking about the value of this change order, we're doing it similar to how we did the other change orders. These are the hard costs. So when we say that the change order is in the amount of $347, that does not include our fee, bonds, insurance. We always reconcile that at the end. That was just how we decided to do our accounting, and that's not a problem.
And
Candy is aware of what that exposure is, we have that accounted for.
And Candy, what is it approximately? I'm trying to remember the percentage. Was it 11%?
The total change is, I want to say 363.
Okay.
I don't have it right in front of me, but
I remember 11% or something coming up.
17,000, yeah.
Okay.
And this change is based on TDA's documents. We met with 5 contractors that are doing the work at the intermediate school. It's going to be a change order to their contract. And other than that, that's pretty much what's involved in that change order. It's just to perform the work per TDA's documents. Any questions on that?
Just a question on funding. So Candy, where, this last change order, 32, it's essentially out of scope for the original project, right? So my question is, where we've got all these funds set aside, is there, I don't know, state, regulations as far as funding and moving things from funds? That's my question. This is kind of out of scope of the original project.
But the original bond language covered, it was much broader than, because we anticipated in the bond that we would want to do improvements in other district buildings with the bond proceeds. And so the original bond language that the voters approved did have language saying that the money could be used in other. Does that get your?
Yeah. My question was on, legally, I just know there are requirements around how these funds are used, and since it was, from my perception, out of scope of the original project.
But legally, it goes back to the ballot language. So how did you define your project in your ballot language? And if it was drafted by Squires and it's generally broad enough to encompass these types of projects and all three.
I'm going to say we've had a couple conversations with David Riley about this prior to even entertaining Domain doing the project, and his response was, you can bring it as a change order to this, through this process, and you can pay for it out of however you would like. Whether the funds don't have to come from the bond, they can, or they can come partly from the bond, was his comment. And we had that conversation at least twice. I know you were on the phone once with him, because we anticipated this question for sure, not knowing that even before where we might be. So I guess I would say, I think there's some flexibility.
We have some flexibility, and I do want to kind of underscore, because it's not like, we have a little bit of extra money in the intermediate school project, so we're looking for a way to spend it. We anticipated in selling the bonds that we knew we had needs in the other buildings, and that we wanted to first take care of the biggest project, but we always anticipated having some other projects that were also high priority in the district that we would want to address if we could with the proceeds from the bond.
I will also say we did fund, if you remember, this project to, I can't remember the exact number, through PI this year, so that money has been, not the entire budget because of the cost that's come in, but I want to say, without looking at numbers directly, like $200,000 was set aside in PI and transferred already in anticipation of this project. So that's where it could partially be funded.
And given that we've got, project left to complete, we're we're down like less than 10%. So, given that we've got, I don't know, it's hard to find the right exact number, but let's say.
If you include the interest proceeds down at the bottom, that's the number that I like to look at, where, with the change orders we're approving tonight, if you include interest, you're going to look at this red number.
671.
Yeah.
It always throws me out seeing the red number. Red means
I know.
something else.
Something else.
I mean, brackets mean one thing and colors
Right.
mean another thing. So, okay, so let's say we got 670, let's call it 650. So 650, we've got, less than 10% left to spend. We would hope that we couldn't find many oops, or like many misses towards the end of the project, but I'm just trying to get a warm and fuzzy feeling about, are we going to make it?
Time-wise or money-wise? The answer to both of those is yes. So right now, you're
The answer
projected.
to both is yes?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Right now, what's projected in our PCI log is about $200,000 left in remaining changes that we know we have out there. Again, It's purely an estimate. What happens is when something happens out in the field, I say, okay, I know we're gonna have a cost here, and I just assign a dollar value. And honestly, I don't have anything in front of me drawing-wise, it's just what my gut instinct is. So right now, we have 200,000 remaining in our potential log. We have 2.5 months to go. I don't foresee much more hitting that potential log unless somebody makes a change that's monumental,
Right.
but I don't foresee that happening.
And are those potentials reflected in here? Because that's a column, potential, so I would assume all that's wrapped in here already.
That's correct.
Yeah, Carrie probably is.
I don't
familiar with
see
this,
that, but
yes.
I feed them those numbers.
Right.
So when I'm talking potentials, that's been communicated
So
to
that
me.
should be kind of, technically, that'd be almost like worst-case scenario where it's 650 over, 650 under black numbers. But, let's say, let's hope that's potential, so let's hope that there should be good news to that.
There is good news. I mean, I've always told you this from the beginning. I won't commit to anything until the end, but we do have unspent, we will have unspent CM contingency as well. That's not accounted for in everything that you're looking at this evening.
That's good. I'm okay with frozen upsides,
Yeah.
or hidden
Me
upsides.
too. Believe me, me too. It's
Right.
never fun to stand in front of your without those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Is that it? Any questions, other questions? Good?
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, this will come around with a recommendation, that concludes my report.
All right. Mr. Hunt. Now I'll turn the meeting over to Ms. Lucott for her treasurer report.
Okay, you previously received a copy of the April Treasurer's financial reports. Just want to hit a couple of highlights for you this month.
Sorry.
Okay, we're ready?
Yeah, that detailed spreadsheet needs to get lost in the, I'll go over it with Phil
Okay.
later on.
Yeah, I wasn't planning to project it, but you have access to it, so if you have any questions, at any time, you can give me a call. You send me an email, you can go for it. But this month, April is the 10th month of the fiscal year for 2019, so we're in the home stretch. We did receive $216,000 in first half property tax payments from Geauga County for general funded bonds. And we also received the state's homestead and rollback reimbursements for Cuyahoga County. And we're wrapping up now the property tax payments that we would receive in fiscal year 19. We've also, in May, received already an advance for the second half property taxes from Cuyahoga County. So I think I referenced earlier in the forecast as I was going through that, that they do start providing advances in May and June. So we will receive an additional amount of property tax payments. I previously provided you with a Google Doc share that you could see how those payments come in. We do continue to receive tuition payments. We are still earning interest on a lot of the funds, especially these project funds. And we collected about $80,000 in lunchroom fund receipts in April as well. And we did receive reimbursements for the OFCC facilities project, and I'll point those out in just a second. Our salary expenditures for April included some custodial maintenance and transportation overtime for about $16,000, substitute costs in the amount of about $25,000, and supplemental contract payments for $15,000. So general fund receipts were about $1.4 million and expenditures were $2.4 million. Again, it's a timing issue. Your capital improvement fund balance, cash balance at the end of the month was a little over $11 million. It's winding down. We're starting to make those larger payments to Gilbane each month. And in fact, in April, it fell that we made 2 payments to them, just the timing of those. Lunchroom fund has a significant balance of $417,000. And you'll notice in your reports that the Excel Tech funds and the federal funds continue to have a negative balance, but again, it's a timing on the reimbursements. The Excel Tech programs are billed in May and June, beginning of the year, so you'll see receipts starting to come in for that at the end of the year. All the other athletic and student activity funds do have a positive balance. Want to point out a couple things in the report, though, in the SM2 report. You would see a negative monthly amount in the general property, real estate property tax line, but it's offset by the very next line, 1.02, that tangible personal property tax line. What we did was we waited until the settlement payments came in and we squared away those PUP tax. It's kind of a subset of the property taxes earned on public utilities, personal property. So that's why you see that. But both of those net together to the amount of the Geauga County settlement. The other thing to point out to you, in the detailed report for the facilities project are the negative expenditures. You'll see about 7 of them. 2, 3, 4, 7 of them. We're starting to see them almost every month now. And those are reimbursements for the facilities project from OFCC. So this month you would see the actual reimbursements on the pay apps for February and March. They were $26,000 and $50,000. So we received a total of $76,000 from OFCC this month in reimbursements. I wanted to point those out to you. And then one other thing I wanted to point out.
Is that from the $600,000?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's part of that. They are accounted in our books as negative expenditures, so refunds, okay, expenditures. And then finally, one of the last reports in here is a breakdown of your appropriations by fund, function, and object code. And you'll see a number of negatives as we get towards the end of the year in that. And the board is asked to approve an appropriation measure for the district beginning of the year, and again at the end of the year. You'll actually do 2 in June. One is the final appropriation measure for this fiscal year. One will be the temporary appropriation measure for next fiscal year. So you'll see those coming up in June at a board meeting. But in the meantime, what you have here in this report is simply the appropriation breakdown for general fund. So these are not all of your funds. The board is required to approve an appropriation measure at the fund level. So this shows you a lot more detail within that one fund. And because some boards will approve intermediate changes along the way throughout the year, I didn't bring those to you because I didn't create or develop the initial appropriation measure. So I didn't want to make any changes to it if I was not the person then making the ultimate reconciliation of the final appropriation measure. So I thought it'd be cleaner that way. So you have the original one, you have the final one. There'll only be one set of changes made to it this year. So you may see some significant changes when that comes to you in June, but that's why. There were no changes made along the way as far as I could tell. But again, this report is simply showing you the internal workings of one of those funds and how it appropriates out at the fund, function, and object level. They offset, and as long as the bottom line on this report shows the $31.6 million appropriation for general fund, and it does have an unencumbered balance of about $4 million. You're within the auditor seats guidelines for that. So you should be fine. Okay, that's what I wanted to point out in your financial reports. In the approval, I guess I can mention now, with the treasurer's recommendations for approval, you'll see again the 5-year forecast that we talked about at the last meeting. You have now the summary chart and the summary of the assumptions that were discussed in presentation 4 at the last meeting.
Thank you. We may have discussion about that when we get to your recommendation, but we'll move on. Can I have a motion for consent agenda items 9A through 9J?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved by Mrs. O'Toole, seconded by Mr. Rankin. Any discussion?
I would just like to thank Claudia McKinley under item A. She's actually heading back to school. in Amanda Hayes, and item D, who's wanting to spend some more time with her family.
Well, I didn't hear that.
Spend more time with family.
All right, Ms. Luca, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. O'Toole?
Yes.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger?
Yes.
Can I have a motion for superintendent's recommendations 10A through F?
So,
Second?
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Rose, seconded by Mr. Kanziger. Mr. Hunt, would you like to speak to these?
Yes, thank Mark Imarino for his service to the district. He is retiring. I'll point out at this point, there's a public notice for a hearing to act upon his rehire, just in this point of the year that we're in. We're going to bring Mark, or I'm going to recommend that we bring Mark back to transition the department over the course of next year. So the first step of that process is to accept his resignation, and again, the public hearing is noticed at the end of the meeting as well.
And then we would expect next year we'll be looking at a new hire potentially in the
Yeah,
guidance
we
department.
would probably post that early, that's something in January, February,
Okay.
we would have out there.
So there could be transitioning and all of that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up.
Sure.
You would anticipate the rehire both as the guidance counselor and the football coach?
Yes. Two separate contracts, but certainly,
not the same person necessarily.
correct.
I think
And
that's what you were
and in the
asking.
meantime, he has to...
Different people.
Hmm?
Her clarification was it would be two different people.
Not the same person necessarily.
Correct, yeah. But, and then he has to be away for 60 days,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So you're going to be able to stay away from
Yes,
summer?
made that very clear.
Is there some way the board can do that?
Item B is the approval of contract for Mallory Mazzolo. I want to point out this is not additional position, this was just left off of the April list. Item C is the approval of the graduating class of 2019. Item D is the recommendation to approve school fees. There are not increases to these fees. Item E is a recommendation for lunch funds. Only change there is a 5-cent increase to milk. And item F is a resolution authorizing the change order 7%.
Okay, any other discussion? Ms. Luca, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole?
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Can I have a motion for treasurer's recommendations 11A through D?
So moved?
Second? Moved by Mrs. O'Toole, seconded by Mr. Rankin. Any discussion here? You want to walk us through these again, Candy?
Yeah, the last meeting was the presentation of the 5-year forecast numbers. This is simply the summary and the assumptions that are submitted to the Ohio Department of Education prior to that May 31st deadline. If you look at the assumptions on the second to the last page, page 11, that had the breakdown of the permanent improvement portion of the operating transfers out that we kind of discussed at the end of the last meeting in that presentation. That may not have been clear, because I had simply pulled out the permanent improvement number. But this shows that we pulled the buses and vehicles out of the general fund budget, out of the forecast to be part of the permanent improvement fund, now being funded as an operating transfer out. It shows the estimated offset for the inside village to PI. That's why I left the full amount of the permanent improvement in there that we budgeted. So like Mrs. Garber, like you referenced earlier, the $1 million for 2020, the $1.5 million for 2021. So you'll see the full amount because the whole total will be offset, but the assumption is that it's coming directly into PI from the property tax PBIDs. And then you see the breakdown of the other transfers out of the general fund into those funds. So I did want to point that out so that you had that detail that was not included in the presentation last week. The other items for recommendation include, obviously, the financial reports as presented, the then and now statement for payment to LGCA. This includes what we're paying them this year for an EMIS coordinator and some SIS administrative support fees, simply a timing issue with the purchase order. And the final recommendation down there is D, and that is a transfer, that is that operating transfer out from the general fund to the permanent improvement fund in the amount of $215,874.21, which is the balance of the $1,735,208 that we budgeted this year for operating transfers out. We have made the transfers in stages. We didn't do the entire 1.7 million at once. I believe it's coordinated with the capital planning plan. As the projects go, we try to time it with the projects. This amount is actually going to be used for the encumbrance of some bus purchases for next year. And again, it's a timing issue. We need to get that order in now so that we have the buses by the 1st of August and can get them certified and road ready by the first day of school. But we won't have access to the New Year's funds until July 1. So this puts that money in that fund now. Okay, those are my recommendations.
Any discussion? Okay, Ms. Luca, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. O'Toole?
Yes.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yeah.
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, other business. So there is one item here of other business, which Mr. Hunt had already spoken to with regard to. This is a public hearing regarding Mr. Imarino doing the rehire. Is there any other business that a board member would like to introduce?
Well, this is your last board meeting. Well,
What will I do with my Wednesday nights?
right, absolutely. I'm sure you'll find something else to do. This might be more exciting. But nonetheless, we definitely wanted to say thank you very much for your service and your help during this interim period with the Board of Education. So on behalf of the Board of Education, the whole staff, the teachers, and all the kids, thank you very much for your help. And appreciate your time. So we have a little card for you.
Thank you.
And a little gift certificate to Burntwood, so you can go enjoy it.
On a Wednesday night.
There you go.
Text us when you're over there.
Think of us.
Thank you
It's
very
really
much.
been a pleasure working with you, Candy.
Same here.
Thank
This
you
has
for
been
all
a
of your
wonderful
help.
experience, and I'm glad I could step in on short notice and kind of keep you moving. So I think we did a good job. in the
You
last
did.
few
You did an
months.
excellent job.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think you've done a little bit more than just keep us moving.
Yes.
You did a great job on the forecast, and definitely added a lot of clarity with managing the project with the intermediate school. So you not only stepped in, kept payroll going, and kept paying vendors, which is
Everybody's
all
been paid.
very important. Kept everybody happy, but you improved, you helped out a lot with our reporting. So I appreciate
Well,
that.
thank you.
We appreciate that.
We hope you'll drop by and say hi once in a while. Let us know how things are
I
going.
will drive past your new building and know a lot more about it than anyone else.
That's right.
That's right. So thank you.
I had one other item. The Northeast Ohio School Board President's Group has reconvened, and so I've been asked to be a part of that. And one of the first meetings is going to be on transitioning and onboarding new treasurers and superintendents. So this is a group of mostly East Side, but I think it's pretty open to whoever, and either the board president or their designee attends. And topics are kind of chosen by the group just to share some best practices. So excited that that's happening again, and I'll keep you guys appraised of what we talk about in those groups. All right, so at this point, can I have a motion? Oh, I guess I'll announce the next meeting. We have a regular meeting on Monday, June 3rd at 6 o'clock in this room, the Sands Community Room. And if I could have a motion for executive session, please.
In accordance with Ohio Revised Code 121.22, the Chagrin Falls Board of Education will go into executive session for the sole purpose of consideration of any of the following matters: employment.
And we don't expect any action following our executive session, as is our practice, so thank you, everybody.
And I will second that.
Yes, sorry, second?
Mr. Reagan?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole?
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes. All right. why don't we take a couple minute recess before we go back?